Welcome, age of vintage society. Anjelica Huston is truly Hollywood royalty. Born into one of the most prestigious families in cinema history, Huston's life is full of immense privilege, heartbreaking tragedy, and lasting scandal. Huston may be on top now, but it was one heck of a twisted journey for her to get there. Why had Anjelica Huston the saddest love life? Make sure to watch the video until the end and leave your thoughts in the comments. If you are new here, join our wonderful community by subscribing to the Age of Vintage channel. Anjelica Huston began to shoot in the 1980s and received the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress for the movie Prizzi's Honor. However, a different role brought her international recognition: Morticia Addams in Barry Sonnenfeld's The Addams Family. Playing Morticia Addams, as glamorous as it seems, does not sound fun. The corsets were so tight that Anjelica couldn't even sit down in the car to get to set. Her makeup artist glued fabric tabs to her face that she'd then taped to the back of her skull, constricting her whole head and resulting in intense headaches and rashes. Luckily, her hard work pulled off, and not only was The Addams Family a huge success, it also became a beloved family classic, defined at least in part by her iconic performance. Besides, Huston is one of the few actresses who have shown their directing talent. She has presented 3 projects since the 1990s without any breaks in her acting career. Huston's appeal has always centred on her combination of ungainly, diffident beauty and self-assurance, the result of a background as insecure as it was privileged, and she speaks plainly in a way that newly minted celebrities do not. She was born into a Hollywood dynasty. Hers was, in many ways, a fairy tale upbringing. The swashbuckling father, larger-than-life director John Huston, the beautiful danseur's mother, the rambling Irish estate that was home. Then came her parents' separation and a move to swinging 60s London. The daughter of legendary Hollywood director and prima ballerina Enrica Soma, Anjelica Huston was born into a world of glamour and privilege, but her childhood hardly reflected that. Anjelica's mother was Italian and stood out for her beauty. She worked as a model and got lead parts in George Balanchine's famous troupe. When she was born, her father was deep in Uganda making a film. It took 3 days and a telegram carrier had to run hundreds of miles to get the happy news to him. His reaction was nonplussed. Katharine Hepburn, his star, had to pry the news out of him after seeing the telegram arrive. When the messenger handed the telegram to my father, he glanced at it, then put it in his pocket. Hepburn exclaimed, "For God's sakes, John, what does it say?" And Dad replied, "It's a girl. Her name is Anjelica." This type of distance, physical or otherwise, would come to define her family dynamic and her relationships. When Anjelica Huston recalls her childhood, it seems like something out of a Victorian novel. Her father had left his 3rd wife for the then teenaged Soma, who gave up her career when she got pregnant at 18. Anjelica spent much of her childhood shut away in a country manor in Ireland. She and her older brother Tony had only their mother and a few tutors for company. She described how Tony turned a cold shoulder to her, and with no other children around, she turned to books to occupy her time and imagination. "I was a lonely child. My brother Tony and I were never very close, neither as children nor as adults, but I was tightly bound to him. We were forced to be together because we were really quite alone. We were in the middle of the Irish countryside in County Galway in the west of Ireland, and we didn't see many other kids. We were tutored. Our father was mostly away." Distance not only defined her relationships with her family, but also her parents' marriage. Within a year of Anjelica's birth, her father dealt her mother a devastating blow. He not only refused to cast Soma in his film Moulin Rouge, he also had an affair with the woman he did cast. He avoided Soma and the kids for months at a time, and engaged in multiple affairs over the years. The tension was rising, and her parents didn't exactly handle it well. In 1962 the parents divorced and Anjelica moved to England with her mother to study at Holland Park School. 1969 was marked with the tragedy. Enrica died in a car crash and the father took the family to the United States. She spent her high school years skipping class to hang out with boys. When Anjelica was still in school, fate came knocking at her door. Franco Zeffirelli was adapting Romeo and Juliet, and producers were looking for their Juliet at her school. She wanted to audition, but her father had other ideas. In 1969, Huston gained her first acting experience in her father's projects. A Walk with Love and Death is considered her debut. She played the 16-year-old noble Claudia. When the movie failed, Anjelica decided that acting was not her cup of tea. As the young woman moved to America, she started developing a modelling career and collaborated with fashion photography masters Richard Avedon and Bob Richardson. She was the favourite of the designer Roy Halston. I spent quite a lot of time in front of the bathroom mirror. Nearby there was a stack of books. My favourites were The Death of Manolete and the cartoons of Charles Addams. I would pretend to be Morticia Addams. I was drawn to her. I used to pull my eyes back and see how I'd look with slanted eyelids. I liked Sophia Loren. After her mother's death, Anjelica's whole world changed. She fled to New York, instantly beginning a new chapter of her life, for better or for worse. Harper's Bazaar called her, wanted to take her photo before the release of the film she'd made with her father. They matched her with one of fashion's most in-demand, but also erratic and provocative, photographers, Bob Richardson. Instantly he drew her into his world, reassuring her of his impending separation from his wife and telling her they belonged together. She may have lost the unconditional love of her mother, but the constant shower of attention from Richardson helped her feel safe again. However, his disturbing dark side soon began to show. The age difference reflected that of her parents when they'd met. He was 42 to her 18. Richardson was addicted to speed, had been institutionalized before, and his previous marriage had melted down after he and his wife began swinging. Anjelica's father, John, insisted that she and Bob Richardson join them on a fishing trip to Mexico with his new fiancée Celeste Shane, aka Cece. Tensions were high, and one night after Anjelica went for a drink with her father, Bob retaliated by throwing a bottle of tequila at her head when she came back to the room. It was the final straw, and her parting words were unforgettable. They flew home in silence with the elder Huston and his fiancée. When they arrived in Los Angeles, Huston told him that it was over. Richardson reached out to shake her hand, and she replied, "If you were the last person alive, I wouldn't shake it." Anjelica retreated to Cece's home in the Pacific Palisades, where she rode horses, spent time in nature, and tried to avoid the blatant fix-ups that Cece subjected her to, that is, until Cece invited her to a party hosted by a popular young actor by the name of Jack Nicholson. Anjelica had already developed a crush on him after seeing him in Easy Rider, but seeing him in real life only cemented it. They danced for hours and she stayed the night, and he sent her home by taxi the next morning. He called a few days later to arrange a date, but then cancelled due to a previous obligation. This set a pattern for their relationship, as she learned that the previous obligation was stunning Mamas and Papas singer Michelle Phillips, Nicholson's ex-girlfriend. But they began a rocky relationship. Anjelica's modelling career was flourishing, as was Jack's acting, which meant they had to briefly go long distance while he made a film and she worked in London. Days after they first parted ways, Anjelica made a disturbing discovery. One of her friends confessed to sleeping with Jack mere hours after she'd left for the airport. At all these years' distance, she says she is able to have perspective on it. I can laugh about it, although she is still stung by the memory of some of his outrages and still charmed in spite of herself. Whether she was travelling with Jack or living with him, whenever Anjelica suspected that he was cheating, she was able to find evidence of it. He wasn't exactly the most fastidious with his affairs, but still she put up with it. In a strange turn, he ended up starring opposite John Huston in Chinatown, in a role where his character sleeps with the daughter of John's character in the film. Huston and Nicholson's tempestuous on-again, off-again relationship lasted 17 years, from 1973 until, after hoping for almost 2 decades to marry and start a family with him, she learned that he would instead be having a child with a younger woman. In the 1970s, the young talent took a substantial interest in cinematography, the famous drama teacher Peggy Fury. The celebrities collaborated again in the movie by Anjelica's father, Prizzi's Honour. The actress personified practical imperative Mayrose Prizzi, the daughter of the mafia leader who fell in love with Nicholson's character. Huston outshone the main character, Kathleen Turner. Hollywood critics expressed their admiration with the Academy Award, which made Anjelica the third person in her family, after the grandfather and father, to win the prestigious prize. Anjelica knew she wanted to try her hand at acting, but she was reticent. She refused to get by on nepotism. But on top of her dad's legend status, she also happened to be dating Hollywood's biggest star. There was no getting away from these types of connections. Huston proudly refused to use them, which meant that she was often left sitting home alone at Jack's, just as her mother had once been when still wed to her father. But she became incredibly popular, and directors showered her with offers. The actress appeared in Francis Ford Coppola's Gardens of Stone, Charles Sturridge's A Handful of Dust, and Woody Allen's Crimes and Misdemeanors. During one of these times, Jack left Anjelica in LA and went to New York on a boys' trip. She found herself at a party where troubled star Ryan O'Neal approached her. When Jack returned home a few days later, Anjelica gave him the shock of a lifetime. She told him that she was in love with Ryan and was leaving him. After years of reticence, Anjelica Huston finally decided to try her hand at film acting, hoping to get a part in The Last Tycoon, only to be brutally shut down by director Elia Kazan, who told her that she wasn't beautiful enough for the leading role she wanted, but that he'd cast her as another character's rejected date. She appeared in the star-studded cast alongside a familiar face, none other than Jack Nicholson, her ex. Soon enough she was seeing both him and Ryan O'Neal. With Jack Nicholson away, Anjelica Huston was spending most of her time with Ryan O'Neal, and she described life with him as a Jekyll and Hyde situation. And just like that story, their relationship had a chilling end. Ryan was physically abusive throughout their relationship. It escalated one terrifying night when he headbutted her because he couldn't find her in the middle of a party. Anjelica fled to an upstairs bathroom and told security that she was fine. Soon after, he entered the room and continued to hit her. The writing was on the wall, but adrift as she was at the time, she still struggled with making a decision. She had no one to look to for guidance. She'd kept her relationship with Ryan mostly secret, and most of her friends were Jack's. She ended up getting help from an unlikely source, her 13-year-old half-sister Allegra, who had just 2 words for Anjelica: leave him. Thankfully Anjelica did, turning back to Jack Nicholson, who bought her a house nearby. She took a 5-year hiatus from film, but when her best friend Bob Raffleson offered her a part in a movie Jack was starring in, The Postman Always Rings Twice, she jumped at the chance, and it didn't hurt that she'd then be able to keep an eye on Jack as he acted opposite a Hollywood's newest blonde bombshell, Jessica Lange. According to Huston, there was never ever a time in their relationship where she felt that she could fully trust him. She'd often find evidence of his affairs in his home, but would brush it off. After all, none of them ever stuck around for more than a night or two, until the day Nicholson committed the ultimate betrayal. One night Jack invited Anjelica over for dinner. There he informed her someone is having a baby, except by someone he meant him with another woman. After years of infidelity and her own struggles with fertility, it was the final straw in their relationship. That was when she finally left Jack, although not without at least one instance where she, as she put it, wailed on him. He took it knowing he deserved it, and they laughed about it later. Anjelica Huston had spent the first 30 years of her life looking for love, first with her family and then in romantic relationships. But now she wanted something for herself and herself only. She wanted to act, without relying on her father or Jack or their friends for parts. And act she did. The roles weren't large and the films weren't massive successes, but she took lessons and got by on her own. Without the looming legacy of her father or Jack holding her back, Anjelica found untold professional success in the 90s. She appeared in more films, a TV miniseries, and even began directing herself. she became the kind of natural A-lister she'd been surrounded by her whole life. If you liked this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you are new here, and if you want to support my work, please visit my Patreon page. Now it is your turn. What do you think about the life and legacy of Anjelica Huston?